Thank you very much. Okay, brilliant. So pleased to meet you all. I am Sean Ruane. I'm a principal data scientist at the Centre for Process Innovation, as Vinny explained. I'm coming at you from sunny Darlington in the northeast of England today. And today, as I've been introduced, I'm going to be talking a little bit about both the market research that we've done with PricewaterhouseCoopers as part of this program, and also some of the proof of concept projects that we have currently running and what we're hoping to do in the very near future. So, what is CPI? Who are CPI? So, we are the Centre for Process Innovation. We are a not-for-profit based in the UK, mainly in the northeast of England and in Scotland. We have about 600 or 700 staff members. Our mission is we are part of the high value manufacturing catapult in the UK. So we sit somewhere in between research and invention and the commercial market. And our mission is to try and accelerate those technologies to market. So that can mean working with smaller organizations to help them commercialize their product or test out things where they don't have the kit or the capability to do in new areas. Or that can mean bringing together larger companies into larger consortia where we see things like market failure or opportunities to collaborate, bring that technology onto the market, work together better, and improve the UK economy and pharma manufacturing as a whole. We have about 22 years of projects with a large portfolio of successful cross-pharma collaborations, and the projects number in the thousands at this point. So, as Vinny mentioned, we've got the presentation in sort of two parts. So part one is going to be on that market research program with PwC, and part two is going to be on the proof of concept projects. Originally, I wanted to talk more about these, but we're not able to release everything that we wanted to talk about. So I'll give kind of a high-level overview of phase one and phase two projects, and we can hopefully get into some questions about it later and how people can get involved as well. So to give a little bit of background and context, the Lab of the Future program was an industry-led program that started in September 2024. Driven by the consortium. So we started out from very first principles in terms of what an actual Lab of the Future was and what direction we wanted to tackle. And then over a series of workshops and of activities, the consortium was shaped, and the mission statement of the program was shaped by the consortium. So kind of as a high-level executive summary of what we're looking at, if will be familiar to everybody in this room in terms of process development and quality assurance labs, which are our main focus rather than research and development, but they currently have poor efficiency in general in terms of fair data, in terms of equipment, connectivity, all of those problems that we're talking about a lot today. And many organizations are trying to undergo digitalization efforts, and some more successfully than others, to try and rectify it. But there is a difficulty around that lack of structure and standards. And because of that, there's a ton of effort that ends up going into bespoke and expensive connections. Interoperability of data and equipment is limited. Data ends up siloed, and actually maintaining and reusing it is difficult. And that acts as a bottleneck to the things that we want to be doing as value cases in the business, from having higher levels of automation, bringing in modeling close to the scientist, and automating both digital and physical tasks. So what we're aiming to as a program is not to build new standards, but we're trying to simplify that digitalization by using standardization and bringing those standards together into a top to bottom lab framework that connects those standards together. And we're aiming to make that into a portable infrastructure as code framework that we could then adopt across multiple organizations and multiple use cases to really bring together and promote those standards and show that you can bring them into a full stack. So we're building them all this with many of the actual outcomes that we've identified in mind, things like keeping in mind things like tech transfer for cross-functional understanding when we're building context into our data, building in AI readiness and AI integration. And we're also working with regulators like the MHRA to reduce regulatory burden, to show how those standards could potentially ease things like compliance. And we're a consortium of pharma standards organizations, and we're hoping that a number of the standards organizations in the room will join us as steering committee for some of our projects. Technology vendors and research and technology organizations. We're running proof of concept projects, and we're building towards a larger program with even more labs and more partners if we can. And so these are the kind of three key levels that we've identified and we're working across. That is standardizing the knowledge layer, so things like ontologies, bringing together data with context, standardizing messaging layers for integrating together systems, so things like LIMS and MES, and then standardizing connection layers for things like plug and play equipment interoperability, which is all near and dear to our hearts. So first of all, talk a little bit about the market research that we did. So this was a program we ran with PricewaterhouseCoopers. where we tasked them with a research project where we outlined basically what we wanted to do as a framework was what is the value of all this that we want to do in digitalization? What's the value case for it? But B, to put together some numbers against the things that we all kind of know, things like how difficult and how much time scientists spend on lab digital, like data wrangling, admin tasks, stuff like that, and try and quantify some of those things so that people can use it for value cases within their organization, and we can use it to try and target what is the highest value areas. So I'm not going to be going through the full piece of research today because it is a very hefty piece of research. I'm not going to be going through everything on every slide, but if people are interested in the further program of research, please get in touch. I'm going to be sending out these slides later, and hopefully we might be able to disseminate these in a series of webinars if there's enough interest as well across the full set of all of these different things, including people, including tech transfer and connection to manufacturing, some of those things that we might not be able to cover today. So in terms of general pharmaceutical and life science trends, first of all, kind of where is pharma positioned in the wider general industry, just to kind of set the scene a little bit. So according to research, the PwC does, and I should mention, sorry, this is a mixture of primary research and secondary research. So according to the research the PwC did, um, they found that pharma is basically behind general industrial manufacturing in terms of its current uses of potential. There's still a lot of room to grow, but there's a potential lot of future potential that we aren't yet utilizing for digitalization. And some of the roadblocks to that digitalization are things we'll be familiar with: internal skepticism, fear of people losing jobs, people wanting to work the way they already do, the limited number of people who actually understand this and have the capabilities to actually enable that digitalization, and of course, the cost and the risk of replacing legacy systems, especially the complexity of things like validation. So things that we're familiar with. So PwC identified five key levers for the lab of the future. So these are things that you need to push on to be able to achieve that digitalization vision. So those are data, automation, integration and validation, analytics and intelligence, transformational change, and process optimization. And just to kind of pick out a few of the key numbers, they found that 30% of staff time is actually spent on just documentation tasks, so things like product dossiers, machine logs, batch records. They found that only 16% of executives actually think they have the right talent for that digital transformation, which does sound correct because there's never enough people who actually know how all of this stuff works. And in terms of process optimization, 70% of labs still have some workflows that with manual entry and potentially paper-based records. So in terms of current digital maturity of pharma companies, so they have a more complicated model behind this, but they split for the purpose of this into three levels. So that is the maturity of the labs are either low maturity, mainly manual workflows, moderate maturity with some digital tools, but those digital tools aren't connected together. There is data integrity focus, but not standardization of that data. And there's that kind of disconnected nature and non-standardized nature means that there's limited cross-functional collaboration due to siloing of data and tools. And then what we're aiming for is this full maturity where we have systems that are actually integrated together and communicating. We're using AI and ML outside of just individual specific use cases, but in general workflows. And things like fair data are actually in place, and you actually get collaboration between different parts of the organization because of it. So they found that actually most QC labs sit within that moderate maturity range, with 65% of labs having launched pilots to try and improve their digital maturity further. But they also found that planning is key because if you have a poor rollout, if you don't plan that properly, there's some research that shows that it can cost 5 to 10 times more and take 5 times longer for an investment and a plant program that's poorly planned versus one that's properly planned. Again, and in terms of process development labs, the level of maturity is slightly higher. More of the labs are in that moderate maturity space and more of them are in that full maturity space, but still there is a long way for improvement and most are within, at best, that moderate maturity space. So then this is a bit of research that they had from some primary research that we did, which looks at basically what is the difference, what is the relative impact versus the relative difficulty of several different interventions and different things that we should be implementing. So obviously on the top left here, we have the things that are the highest benefit for the lowest difficulty and the things that maybe we should be prioritizing. What they found was from a survey of people that these were stabilizing continuous use of AI and machine learning is potentially high benefit and relatively easy to implement. Connecting equipment is obviously high benefit. And then also one of the highest benefit is actually bringing those digital tools within lab workflows and having the hybrid digital and physical lab workflows in operation within your organization. Whereas there's some things that are potentially higher impact or higher difficulty and lower impacts, which potentially are things like data governance and strategy, which might have less impact on the final product of what your labs are offering. Then they've taken those different interventions and kind of put them in terms of a vision of what is a short-term intervention, what is middle-term implementation, and what's in the long term. So if we look along automated systems, you've got things like connected equipment being what people are looking at in the short term. In terms of midterm, it's integrating those systems together into connectivity. In the long term, those digital hybrid workflows. Whereas if you look at something like data, in short term, we have digital documentation reporting. Then in the midterm, we're looking more to actually establishing data as a product, as they do in some industries. Data products key. And in the long term, that kind of stabilization of continuous use of AI and ML, which is potentially something we should all be doing all the time, it seems like at the moment. And then in terms of transformational change, they found things like short-term, people could be doing things like community champions. In the midterm, cross-functional integration between quality and manufacturing, for example. And then in the long term, things like global scientific networks, where people can have inter-organizational platforms to be able to trade and share data easily. Then to pick out some more kind of exact key figures that they found that 70% of lab workers' time is actually spent on admin preparation work and data handling and reporting, which as somebody who used to work in a lab, I can think that seems relatively accurate. But another way of breaking that down, kind of along another axis, is that every hour a scientist spends thinking about experimental strategy, they spend 2 hours on activities that you could say are automatable. So things like preparing samples, filling out paperwork and managing data outputs. Only a third of their time, kind of in either case, is being used to the stuff that they want to be used. So then moving on to data as that key lever for Lab of the Future. So they found that basically lab data is an extreme time drain for staff, with data scientists spending up to 52% of their time on manual data retrieval, transformation, and cleansing on average. Up 66% of staff having difficulties or having their work delayed by difficulties with accessing data. Another key thing is one of the things we saw with Johnson & Johnson earlier, these high error rates and that 1-10-100 rule. That element that if you catch an error in a deviation, it's going to be much more expensive than if you found it during entry. So then some of the numbers that we found is that 18 to 40% of simple spreadsheets that are manually data entered will have errors within them, which is absolutely huge. And that up to 25% of your operating budget can be spent on rectifying poor data quality or lost data. And I think that's within QA labs, that specific piece of research, which is an enormous amount of potential improvement. They've done some work querying, or they found some research querying various experts on what they see as key issues within that element of bringing that data together and those integrated systems. And the key findings are things like unstructured and siloed data. So the unstructured data is a major barrier to utilizing experimental data. And then obviously a lack of that metadata standardization contributes to that in a large way. And 52% of respondents saying the biggest barrier to AI is data quality, which probably is expected by a lot of people here. Moving more into that standardization focus, they found that there's evidence showing that interoperable and standardized data can help in some of the key value cases that we want within the industry. So things like robotics and automation, simplifying integration and making that more effective. Again, simplifying integration and making AI and advanced analytics more effective and more interoperable between different parts of your organization. And then accelerating tech transfer, standardizing allows interoperability of your data between different parts of the organization and allows for seamless data migration, simplifying and reducing the costs of things like tech transfer between process development and manufacturing. or different labs within your organization. And there is a strong desire for that standardization, with 46% of experts basically citing that they want standard data and data templates and metadata, and potential benefits including time savings for scientists, labor cost savings for things like data pipelines, making better decisions within project teams and outside within the business, avoiding rework and errors, and then better knowledge retention when you do actually when people leave the organization, for example, you can maintain some of that tacit knowledge. So all the things that we really want to be doing. Doing a brief kind of diversion into equipment integration, the numbers are still quite uneven across pharma. So 59% of large pharma say that 60% or more of their equipment is integrated and automated with data capture, which is still a significant portion that is not all integrated. And 31% of people said that their R&D labs are actually digitally siloed and still rely on things that aren't then further connected together to the ecosystem within their organization. And kind of a really nice, or not so nice number, I guess, but 61% of large companies report that that lack of standardized data format is one of the major barriers, or is the primary barrier to actually connecting their instrument together. And having to do custom mapping, custom bespoke work for each time they bring in a new piece of equipment means that 55% of large biopharma say that integration is too costly to actually justify the return on investment. So there needs to be solutions to bring that integration cost down. So going into the final section for this market research that we're going to cover, what are the leading pharma companies in this area, or the leading labs in this area, doing differently? What are they focusing on? So it said 15% of those labs are considered leaders within and fully mature. And though key success characteristics of those labs are focus on foundational characteristics like data quality, getting the data fundamentals right, and focusing actually carefully on what tools you have and integrating them together into a wider ecosystem. The leadership characteristics you need to actually be able to achieve that are things like a clear strategic roadmap, moving the people and culture towards actually acceptance, and then actual clear success metrics as well. And then in terms of benefits, we're already seeing 50% of those leaders experiencing benefits like quicker time to market, reduced human errors, and improved cost efficiency. So the digital leaders are then kind of anchoring that maturity model against some solid foundations, and those are building those solid data foundations into the organization from the ground up, investing in the talent to be able to manage that, support from the executive, so you're not constantly having to fight budget every time you want to bring in new parts to your program. You can justify long-term changes and focus on what you need to do in the future rather than what is right here in the here and now. Change management through the actual culture of the organization, focusing on your technology ecosystem. So also thinking about things about what tools are coming up in the near future and making your ecosystem ready to adapt things like AI and being AI ready. And then finally, having a clear vision and strategy for a lab of the future, vision that is focused on their business goals, what they actually want to get out of it. So moving on to part two, which is the proof of concepts that we're working on as part of the program. We're going to be giving a high level overview of this. Because unfortunately we couldn't give all the details we want to, but we'll give a high level overview of how we want things to work and what we're aiming to do. So we currently have a phase one proof of concept underway that's running from 2026 to 2027, funded by Pfizer. So that focuses on those layers we're talking about, the knowledge graph layer, bringing data together with context, a messaging layer, and an overall cloud architecture that's built as infrastructure as code to bring it together. So the equipment connection layer part is out of scope for phase one of the work that's ongoing at the moment because we just did not have the budget to be able to manage that. So what we're trying to build in this phase one is an event-based lab framework where we're getting data generated from experiments along with the metadata. We're bringing that into messages, so semantically linked messages that are structured using manufacturing language and standards. So ISO S88 and 95, as we've talked about IC 88 before with the Pastoral Alliance C ontology. We like to push that into then a messaging layer, which routes it to where it needs to go, essentially. So common messaging layer that all the different integrated systems can see within a bus. We're using that in the proof of concept as a thing to enable microservices within the cloud. So things like having a validation system that doesn't have to necessarily sit within the pipeline. things like alarms and flagging, and also to stream data to where it's needed, whether it's in the data lakehouse we're using or the knowledge graph. But we're also hoping to build this in the future as kind of a hub that we can provide as an open kind of standard or an open, sorry, system for people to be able to then sit their systems within this larger kind of ecosystem and send messages back and forth and integrate together. And we're going to be trying that out in phase 2 as well with other systems. So then at the top, we're interested in a knowledge graph that brings together all that data with context, structure and cross-industry standards. A few of the things that we've been talking about today are going to be key parts of that knowledge graph. And that obviously then gives us our pipeline for things like AI and visualization, which isn't necessarily the focus of phase 1, but we are going to be building on AI querying tools and AI visualization tools, and also just standard visualization dashboards for scientists within the lab so they can get the value of their data as it's produced by bringing it to them with context. And we're packaging all this up as an infrastructure as code to make it portable so it can be spun up within different people's clouds and in different labs. And we're also building the whole thing in mind with simplified governance. So when you're bringing in a new data source, trying to see how we can minimize the amount of mapping work you need to do, the amount of different changes you need to make every time you bring in a new system, essentially. And we're aiming for no proprietary technology across the whole thing. So yeah, we're trying to build an active data integration and testing it with a real use case, which is our oligonucleotide process development lab, which we have from synthesis all the way to bulk drug substance. And this has a mixture of equipment-oriented workflows, equipment-oriented tasks and data, manual tasks that we're capturing. In phase 1, we have less significant automation, so no liquid handlers, but we're hoping to bring that in within phase 2. So speaking of that phase 2, what we're adding to kind of the scope for the phase 2 is what we're seeing as kind of a key demonstration of the problem statement of the consortium, and that's the problem of AI-driven and automated labs, because they require interaction of data at multiple different levels. So things from data coming out of the equipment to being extracted, integrated, structured with context, communicating with an AI framework that then has to schedule and orchestrate that with the constraints of the lab in mind, and then actually then control the equipment. And all of this has to interact together seamlessly. So due to that complexity, this is a really challenging use case, and a lot of organizations are struggling to do this outside of individual bespoke use cases and are struggling to scale it. So there are standards that are emerging for this area, things like model context protocol on top of the ones we're looking at in phase 2, but they're not yet integrated together into a framework. We'd like to try and show that that can be done and we can make it more accessible to everybody in a plug and play context. So this funding call has been the catalyst for this phase 2, which is a £1.5 million grant from Innovate UK. And it's an exact match to the program theme because they're looking for things that are deployable across multiple use cases that are focused on standardization, both utilizing and promoting standards, and are focused on AI and automation within the lab. So exact match for what we're trying to do. So this phase 2 is going to be based on that IUK funding. We're bringing in both pharma partners and vendors and small enterprises from the UK. The bid is going to be led by one of those small enterprises, which is Pfizer, which is a UK AI operations company. They focus on letting scientists interact with their models and then bringing that into the wider context of the laboratory. We're going to be, again, focusing on that portable standardized framework element, but in this case, we're building on some extra elements to make that AI in the loop and human in the loop as well, because we're interested in both open loop operations with the scientist, with the AI acting as a co-scientist to help query data, design experiments, queue methods, and run equipment. But also we're interested in closed loop as well, with the AI requesting those next step of methods directly. We're going to be building a test case at CPI. I'll talk a little bit more about that test case in a minute. So in terms of additions on top of phase 1, we're going to be adding an AI model framework developed by Pfizer that's here just a single thing, but it's going to be a complex set of layers, including Bayesian logic and different model frameworks. We're going to be then bringing that in with a standardized interface that we're aiming to use model context protocol. We're then going to be having a structured request pipeline for that AI to request new experiments through the messaging layer and to control the equipment. And then we're building in a standardized connection layer developed by another SME, which is going to be Orosity. And the idea behind this is to be sort of a toolbox that can plug and play to multiple of the different standards, so things like allotrope and sealer, and can also then understand the semantics of those standards when they're coming in. And we'll talk a bit about law in a minute, but we're interested in how that then populates into the wider architecture as well. So for the consortium, we are open to new participants. We're open to people who are interested. We have quite a few partners already. We've got Pfizer ourselves working on the core architecture, Orosity working on that standardized connection layer and the stuff in the OT layer, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, who are going to be providing the overall steering for this and use case. The National Physical Laboratory, which is another research organization in the UK, which is going to be looking at helping us integrate more of those ontologies together and making sure the whole thing is built correctly. And then we've also got additional partners in discussion, including another SME, additional pharma partner, and equipment manufacturer. And that phase 2 use case is going to sit on the intracellular drug delivery center at Sedgefield, which is a high throughput lipid nanoparticle formulation development rig that has process steps, liquid handlers, and process analytics, including mobile robots. So this is going to be a much more heavily automated use case, and that's potentially going to give us our capability to do closed loop operations across multiple workstations. I'm not sure I have time to quickly go too much into how this is going to work, but essentially the data up is going to be the same as phase 1, except coming directly from equipment. The AI is going to be able to query the knowledge graph and the wider context of the data, and then be able to make those requests down through the equipment layer. And as a final element, I mentioned earlier, we're interested in that plug and play capability discovery. What we want is when new equipment's coming in through those self-describing protocols, we're propagating that new capability upwards through the architecture, sending messages that the new equipment's been integrated, bringing a description of the equipment into the knowledge graph, and then populating that model context protocol with the new levers that the AI is able to pull. We're really interested in how we can make that simpler. So thank you very much. And yeah, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask.